chat. He just retired. He's the superintendent in Michigan, before that in Colorado. And he said, yeah, they made the same promises, and now they're firing teachers on the basis of standardized test results, students. He says, as a matter of fact, they're firing superintendents who don't fire enough teachers on the basis of standardized test results. But they assured us that no one would ever be evaluated on the basis of these results. Okay. So I'm actually going to look at about 8 different things here, and I'm not going to read through the list because we're going to talk about each one of these. So what's wrong? Well, standardized testing redefines what's significant in the curriculum. And because teachers and students can't ignore the fact that success as teachers and learners will be evaluated on the basis of scores that they obtain on these tests, which are always in particular subjects, not in others. So success is all measured by math, science, and language. As Mattis has pointed out, this influences not only what is taught, but how it's taught. And teachers invariably design delivery of the curriculum so that it parallels the kinds of questions that will be on the test. And mea culpa, I confess, I was a high school English teacher. My students had to write departmental exams, and you bet that I taught them Hamlet line by line because I knew they would be asked to identify the speaker and the circumstance by line. So we couldn't just watch the movie and then move on to do Titus Andronicus because this was really a hot shot grade 12 class that didn't need a line by line. Forget it. We had to do that. That's how they were going to decide. So I did it. Every teacher does it. And everybody says they don't. Teaching the tests. Well, as you know, teachers and parents of young children can circumvent the objective standards by teaching students to write standardized tests. The whole basis of standardized testing, of course, is based on the assumption that you have a normal population that you are testing, right? What happens when half of that population is trained to write the test and the other half is? You now have a normal population? Not yet. But we have all this kind of stuff, like how to train the kids to write the test. As a matter of fact, the companies who make the test sell you material for how to cheat and do better on the test than you really ought to. Right? Because what you know is not relevant, it's what score you get on the test.
Or is that grade 3?
This one, yeah. Oh, it's grade 3. This one, I'm just pointing out here that you see these are for different states. This is Ohio, this is New York, this one's Florida, California, this is a New York grade 8 English language. Each of these is a preparation program for preparing to write this particular test. Now, why does each state have to have its own prep programs? I mean, doesn't a grade 6 need to know the same math in Ohio as in New York, as in Florida, as in California? I mean, don't they all agree on what you need to know? No. So you have to prep for the test. So 2 things this tells us. One is that even the experts hired by governments can't agree on what's important because they don't test the same things. And the second thing it tells us is that these materials are not intended to test subject matter knowledge. They're intended only to help you do better on the test, to actually achieve higher than you should. Really, that's what they're about. Okay, which of course screws the norm, right? Way faster than I thought. And of course, senior students have been distorting the standardized test norms for years with lots of help. And for things like the graduate exam, the American college tests, the SAT, which SAT originally meant the Scholastic, no, it started out as Scholastic Achievement, and then it became Scholastic Aptitude, and then it became Scholastic Assessment, and now they don't use a number or name, they just say it's the SAT. Right? They don't actually say what it is. But it's what most universities in the States use to determine whether or not kids get in. Right? So of course, you can beat the system by studying how to do it. This is a favorite of mine as a former Associate Dean of Graduate Programs, we have a lot of international students, and international students, of course, have to demonstrate their ability in English, and they often do that by writing the test of English as a foreign language, the TOEFL, right? And this one, at least, is honest. Outsmart the TOEFL, right? Not demonstrate that you can speak and understand and write English, but beat it. This is how to beat the test. And as anybody who's worked in Asia knows, it's a huge industry over there for teaching people how to beat the TOEFL. Or any of the other tests that are now used. So again, and all of these, of course, are intended to help you do better than you really should on the test. At its worst, learning a test can involve memorizing correct answers to test items with no understanding of why the answer is correct. You just know that number 47 is C, right? You don't. And this has become known as the Lake Wobegon effect. That's because Garrison Keillor, in his novels, he's the American humorist. He's the American Final Cafe guy, right? Final Cafe is actually based on Prairie Home Companion, which is Garrison Keillor. And Garrison Keillor had this fictional town called Lake Wobegon. And in Lake Wobegon, everybody wrote this test every year. And the seniors all told the juniors, the grade 12s all told the grade 11s what the answers were to the test, right? So they all knew that, 47, the answer C. Right? But nobody knew what it was about, right? So that's the worst kind of piece of test. Second problem, teaching only lower order knowledge. You're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy and so on. Even that's a bit outdated now, but the idea that there are increasing levels of complexity to knowledge, right from just knowing a fact to being able to use it to do something, to be able to analyze and synthesize and so on. You can't test those kinds of things in mass testing. The only thing you can really test is knowledge in mass testing. So how our current government thinks you can have standardized tests clearly in a number of subjects in every grade from kindergarten through grade 12 and have some kind of subjective analysis of the students' learning in this. It's just not possible, right? They're going to have something you can fill in bubbles and run through a machine. And, so anyway, standardized testing don't measure higher order thinking. Ayers put it this way: standardized tests can't measure initiative, creativity, imagination, conceptual thinking, curiosity, effort, irony, judgment, commitment, but they can measure isolated skills, specific facts and functions, the least interesting and least important aspects of learning. So they can do that. If that's what you want, if that's what education is. Validity and reliability, these are terms that we use a lot in research. They have very specific meanings in research. Validity deals with whether a test actually measures what it purports to measure. And I'll give you an example. My wife was adjudicating a physics exam at a high school here in Regina. And two students who happened to be Chinese students were totally stopped by a question. They could not do this question, and they called her and asked her how. We don't know what this means. And the question had to do with two boats traveling on a lake. And one boat went by and created a wake of so many feet high, and the other boat went by creating a wake so many feet high, and these wakes crossed each other. What's the net effect? So, okay, this is wave theory, right? They're doing physics and they're doing wave theory. These guys had no idea what a wake was. They thought wake was what you did in the morning, right? So they had no idea what this question meant. So left to their own, they would not have been able to answer the test, and we would conclude from that that they don't know physics. Right? Well, the question wasn't physics, the question was vocabulary. And standardized tests are great for messing things up that way. So what was being tested in that question? Was it physics or was it language? So we would say that question has no validity because it's not testing what it says it's testing. Okay? Litton and Pirrett found, using a regression, kind of statistical analysis, found that social class could explain 45% of the variation in Alberta's standardized test scores, whereas school factors explained only 3 to 6%. So in other words, you could predict how well a student would do on a test if you knew how many square feet his house was. That was a much better indicator than what school the kid went to. Knowing what school would give you like a 3 to 6% chance of being right. Knowing how big the kid's house was would give you a 45% chance of being right. Yes. So what's being tested? Is it really the knowledge that the student has, or is it social and economic factors that are being tested? Bottom line is that it's rare to find high-stakes standardized achievement tests that have any meaningful validity. I didn't say that. So, and I'll come back to this in a second. Like right now, interestingly, this is a graph of SAT scores. Remember that? Scholastic aptitude, like how you get into American universities? Okay, that's on this. This is the score here. This is family income. So what's being tested by the SAT? You know, is it testing students' knowledge, or is it testing their social capital? No. It's obviously not just testing their ability. And this is 3 scales, by the way. Critical reading, math, and writing. It's not just one scale. It's 3 different scales, and they all follow the same pattern. Funny thing. Reliability. Reliability refers to the ability of a measurement tool to accurately measure what it's purporting to measure. So if I measure it today and I measure it tomorrow, it's going to be the same, right? If it's reliable. So I'm a carpenter. I know, strangely enough, I'm a carpenter. If I measure a door frame, because I'm putting casing around it, I'm doing that on 10 doors right now. If I measure it today and I measure it tomorrow, it's going to be the same measure. You know, it's not going to change overnight. However, this is David Rogoso from Stanford pointed out. This is actually talking the Stanford Achievement Test, also called the SAT, by the way, which is not the same test. Also called the SAT. Their math test considered more reliable than most. And he found that, that students, grade 9 students who are actually at the 45th percentile in real achievement will score more than 10 percentile points apart more than 50% of the time. So writing it yesterday and writing it today, more than half of the time they'll score more than 10 points different. So is the test reliable? No. It's highly dependent on a whole lot of other factors. And that's one of the best tests. I left out a whole section here, by the way, on scoring errors on standardized tests that have occurred in the United States. It's amazing. There's stuff that would curdle your Kahlua. Really. It's amazing. I mean, there have been millions of dollars in settlements over screwed up test results in the States. There have been kids who have been failed and not allowed to graduate from high school who actually passed the test and they found out later. There have been kids who got scholarships who shouldn't have, and kids who shouldn't have gotten them. Kids who shouldn't have gotten them got them, kids who should have gotten them didn't. And so on, all kinds of stuff like this, and it has gone on and on and on through the years as the States has gotten more and more dug into this mess. And as my friend the director from Michigan said, they know it's a disaster, they know it's a mess, and they just can't get out of it. They're just caught up in it. You taught in China? Yeah, you know the testing system there? They all know it's terrible, it's rotten, it's awful, and they can't get out of it. And we want to get into it. Systemic bias. Tests are biased by culture and language. This is obviously just a little bit of an analogy, but it's nearly impossible to develop test items that are language, gender, and culture neutral. As in my example earlier, successfully answering a math question is dependent on the student's knowledge of the language in which the question is asked. Standardized test systems systematically favor children of privileged, well-educated, affluent parents, disadvantaged students from minority groups, English second language students, and students with disabilities. So my kids do fine. Not a problem. I have absolutely no concerns about my daughter. She's past it now, but she would have no problem with this. So she's in that first category. Privileged, she wouldn't like hearing that. Well-educated, affluent. Manitoba, this is actually Rick Hesch's research, some of you may know Rick. Manitoba, a test of grade 3 math proficiency found that students in Winnipeg School Division No. 1, which contains most of the city's urban core, scored 53.2% on average, significantly below the provincial average of 60.7. Students from middle class Fort Garry scored on average of 74.
Middle class what?
Oh, Fort Garry, just the section of Winnipeg. And I don't think it's the water. You know, there's a systemic bias, clearly, towards some kids. So, you know, the whole assumption is the level playing field. It's not a level playing field. And recognition of that has resulted in protests in the States. There are parents who refuse to send their kids to school on testing days. There are protests like this, you know, lobbies, all kinds of protests. But, you know, governments get tied into their own accountability issues, right? You know, like they spend a whole lot of money doing something and then it's a flop, but they can't admit that. They can't say that this is a terrible flop and we just wasted several $100 million of your dollars on it. So, you know, we're going to quit and not do it anymore. They can't say that, right? Because they look like idiots. So they just keep doing it. And that's what's happening down there. Although it sounds like maybe there's some hope. Inappropriate use of results. Speaking for the CPA, Canadian Psychological Association, and the Canadian Association of School Psychologists, and geez, if anybody ought to understand testing, I'd think it would be these people, wouldn't you? Okay. Argue that student performance is dependent upon many factors that are not measured in standardized tests. These include, but are not limited to, family stability, parental involvement, and other expectations for student success in school, early and ongoing home stimulation, students' motivation, student absenteeism, and student capacity to learn. None of which is considered in the test score. Students are not randomly assigned to schools. You know, students go to schools in their neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are based on socioeconomics. You can actually predict the test scores in any city. All you need is Stats Canada's information on income by postal code, right? And you can just go and predict the scores in any school and be very accurate, just because you know from the basis of income. So schools don't get their students randomly, and schools have little or no control over the majority of the factors I mentioned above. So any attempt to place the blame for poor test performance on schools alone without giving proper consideration to each of these other factors is problematic at best and misleading at worst. And that's from the experts. Right? Now, of course, governments assure us they will never, ever compare schools or rank schools. But of course, they will give the numbers to the Frontier Institute and the Atlantic Institute, who do it for them. And do it terribly, by the way. It's just garbage. If you want to see stuff that is not research, just look at that stuff. I'm happy, by the way, at any time to rip it apart for you. I have a whole other PowerPoint. Anyway. Ranking schools where it's been done has not proven to be an effective method of improving performance in low-scoring schools. There seems to be this trait theory for schools, like, oh, this school they get really high standardized test scores, so what do they do there? Oh, well, they do this and this and this. Okay, well, let's just pick that up and move it over to that school. Well, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. You can't even take the principal out of this school and put him in that school, and suddenly it's gonna happen. It doesn't work that way. It's way more complicated than that. So the trait thing doesn't work. Interesting little consequence, side effect here. There's evidence in the States that the negative publicity is leading experienced teachers to move from urban schools to the suburbs, because that's where the wealthier kids are, right? And they do well. So the teachers are safe, right? Nobody wants to teach in the inner city schools where the kids do badly, because then your job's at risk, because you get low scores, right? Same thing has happened in New Zealand. I see Larry's not here to defend New Zealand against all comers. The same thing happened in New Zealand, where teachers moved away from the more difficult schools to the suburban schools, so that they wouldn't have to deal with this. Podlowski noted that in Alberta, teachers are increasingly reluctant to teach in grades 3, 6, and 9 because that's where the standardized tests are administered, because they don't want the pressure from having to produce the results. They don't want to spend their year teaching the test, so they don't want to teach those grades. A number of years ago, I did a similar presentation in Ontario, and there was a bunch of people there from the federations, teachers' federations in Ontario, and they said, same here, same here. So teachers don't want to teach in those grades. So once you get a couple years under your belt, you transfer out. Get yourself into a different grade where you don't have to do this. Comparing and ranking children, which they want to test every kid in Saskatchewan every year, but they're not going to rank anybody. Yeah, okay. What this points out is that any assessment result has to be used for an appropriate way, and it's never appropriate to use test scores to justify decisions that are harmful to students. And unfortunately, two of the most common uses of high-stakes testing are in fact harmful, and those two things are retention in grade and assignment to low-track classrooms. That's the two most common outcomes of somebody doing badly on standardized tests. And both of those have proven over and over and over again, no matter how intuitively they may seem like they should work, they don't. They make things worse. So the results are used to make things worse. Cost. Well, this is over 10 years ago. It was estimated that Ontario's standardized testing program cost over $50 million a year. And they don't test everybody in every grade. And that was 10 years ago. I have never heard guys over here talk about how much is this going to cost? Where are these tests? Who's going to develop these tests? Are you going to buy them from somebody? Are you going to pay somebody to score them? Are you going to develop them yourself? Oh, who's going to do that? Oh, you're not going to pay them? Like what? Who's going to mark this stuff? For free? How How's it supposed to work? These things, it's a very expensive scenario. And again, this is a number from 10 years ago, but you know, you're mostly educators. Can you think of any better way to spend $50 million in education? Yeah, I think so. Get near the end here. Okay, influencing educational policy. Very few people actually possess the necessary expertise to understand standardized test results. I'm not trying to insult anybody. Okay, but most people don't understand statistics very well. Okay, that's why they can be fooled by statistics. It's not because they're stupid, they just don't know much about statistics. I have a doctoral student right now who's writing his doctoral dissertation on how principals interpret the word average. You know, we're pointing you to a new school next year. It's about average. Okay, what does that mean? You know, there's no agreement among principals about what that means. That's not exactly a complex statistical term, average. No, but there is no agreement on what it means. So, you know, then we start getting into the test scores and what they mean, right? So, most people have to accept what they read in newspapers and see on television. This makes it very easy for proponents of testing to argue that the general public supports this kind of assessment regime, and of course the public does, because the media doesn't provide the information upon which to base an argument against that testing. Right? So all they know is, hey, Engelfeld High School is the best high school in the province. Whoopee! You know, must be true because we live in Engelfeld. Right? You know, and Martin and Scott are down at the bottom. Terrible. They must be terrible. Right? When I lived in London, Ontario, worked at the University of Western Ontario, I worked with two schools, and they went through a little regime like this. The two schools that I worked with, one of them ended up ranked 3rd in the city, the other was ranked 54th. And anybody who thinks that everybody in the 54th was all motivated to do better because they've done so badly is crazy. I mean, they were just so beaten up by it. I mean, they worked hard, they were good teachers, they tried, they were doing everything that they could, and they were ranked 54th. You know, and somehow or other that was supposed to make them feel good and motivated and so on. And of course the people in school number 3 just went, yay, you know. Good. So one might legitimately ask what experts in the area say about standardized testing, and I kind of already said this, right? This is the Canadian Psychological Association and the Canadian Association of School Psychologists roundly denounced the misuse of standardized testing, particularly in reporting decontextualized data in the commercial media, which is of course what happens, and then the inevitable ranking of schools based on that. We believe the public is being misinformed on a matter that's extremely important to the operation of schools and to the education and well-being of children. And unless somebody can show me somewhere, and I ask this every time I talk about this, show me a jurisdiction that has been able to stop this from happening. Show me anywhere on the planet that has been able to stop places like the Atlantic Institute and the Frontier Institute from getting the data and publishing it, ranking schools. Anywhere. Just show me somewhere. I can tell you it doesn't happen in Manitoba, but that's because Manitoba won't give them the data. Right? So they do publish scathing things about Manitoba's, what are they hiding? Right? Why are they hiding this from us? You know, because you're idiots. That's why. But anyway, please, you know, again, I'd say it to, you know, if the deputy minister was here, I'd say, show me a jurisdiction where this has not happened.
Some of the international school standardized testing systems haven't got their shit together, pardon my French, to actually be in a place where they could publish those in a way that would be meaningful. Mm-hmm. So there's an example.
Oh, yeah. How about we save the questions till the time?
Oh, yeah, okay.
This is supposed to be uninterrupted here.
Yeah,
so.
okay. So I'll be done real quick here. Anyway, I mentioned my area is actually educational law, and I think there's actually a pretty good charter argument here. Clearly, I think there's a prima facie case of discrimination under section 15 of the charter, 15.1. Results of standardized tests may have significant consequences for students seeking employment or entrance to post-secondary education. If any group of students is systemically disadvantaged by such testing, that group is arguably being denied equal protection and equal benefit of the law as guaranteed in section 15. So, I think there's an argument, and actually we're, a doctoral student and I are working on an article on that right now, whether there is probably a legal argument here. But you know, you might not win it, but you could have a lot of fun with it. Interestingly, in Ontario, where they have a grade 10 literacy test, you can't graduate from high school unless you pass the grade 10 literacy test, right? So you actually get 3 cracks at it on 10, 11, and 12, right? But a number of Toronto high schools did very badly, scored way below the provincial average and so on. And the principals were there, you know, like gangbusters saying, hey, look at, you know, you're not looking at the size of our international student population, our second language population. You're not looking at the fact that we have all of these people with special needs in our school. You know, you're not considering those when you look at this ranking of our school and giving us this number and so on. What are they doing? They're just standing in front of everybody and saying, hello, we're systemically disadvantaged. Right? So this is not a fair assessment of us. So, in language eerily reminiscent of the argument of the manufacturers of tobacco products and guns, the Ontario Education Quality and Accountability Office in 1998 stated, and I heard something like this recently, or locally, province-wide tests are not about passing or failing students or about comparing schools. The primary purpose of the tests is to improve student learning, to identify areas of strength, and to address areas where improvement is needed. So given the fact that the press invariably uses standardized tests to compare schools, and that high-stakes decisions are being made on the basis of standardized test scores, this hardly seems likely to me. So apparently, high-stakes standardized testing doesn't harm schools and students. People harm schools. And that kind of brings me back to, since this is my last slide, to, you know, PowerPoints are not inherently evil. But the opportunities for abuse are huge. And standardized testing is just like that. It's not inherently evil. But it's so easily abused that it has been abused everywhere it's been instituted. And I can't believe that we're suddenly a place that's not going to happen. And that's where I'll get out.